We have a very special program tonight offered by members of the California Living History Project. And it gives me great pleasure, without any further commentary, to introduce to you, according to his card, William Brown Hyde, former President and Commander-in-Chief of the Republic of California. Commander Hyde.
Thank you, ma'am. We always want to make this announcement at the beginning of the program rather than the end. They are taking contributions.
Yes.
Let's see why. You'll find out why we suggest that now. Later on, you may not want to give any money. And my name is William Brown Hyde. And this is right here is my lovely wife, Susan Hyde. She cleans up mighty fine. It's wonderful for me to see her tonight because the last time I saw her was in 1850 when I buried her at our rancho up by Red Bluff, what you call Red Bluff today. It was my rancho was up there. We buried her next to the river, and wouldn't you know, that spring the river flooded. Last time I saw her, she was headed downstream. My suspicion is how she ended up somewhere about 6 feet deep in the slum gully end of the Sacramento building. So it's good to see her again tonight. Many of you received my card, my calling card, as you came in, and you'd admire to know that I have worn many a hat in my day. Of course, as you know, I was the President of the California Republic and the Commander-in-Chief of the Bear Flag Revolt. But I also held many other titles here in, next door in Colusa County. I was probate county judge, presiding judge, court of sessions, deputy county surveyor, deputy sheriff, county treasurer, recorder, auditor, and clerk. Most of them simultaneous to one another. In fact, there's one great story I don't have really time to tell you tonight. Well, very quickly. I was the presiding judge for a fellow that had been accused of horse theft. And they brought him in, and I was the clerk. I was also the presiding judge. And the clerk said to the judge, this fellow doesn't have any defense. So we put our heads together and figured out, well, now, there's no reason I can't be his defense attorney. I was admitted to the bar in Butte County. So I asked the fellow, how would you like me to be your defense attorney? Somehow he thought that would be a really good idea. What he didn't know, however, is that as presiding judge, I also had the responsibility to act as prosecutor. So I defended him as best I could, and I accused him as best I could, and I overruled my own objections on several accounts as judge. It was an interesting trial. He was found guilty. I pronounced him to be taken out and hung till he was dead. May God have mercy on his soul. But wouldn't you know, when we were sent out to fetch the feller, we had to take him over to Hamilton. We didn't have a jail built at that time in Monroeville. And wouldn't you know, the governor had commuted his sentence and set him free without him letting us know. Now that's the law in California for you. You never know what's going to happen. Well, I've been called many things, including by the esteemed Captain John C. Fremont, a damned Mormon. And I must plead guilty to that fact. Back in 1837, Mrs. Hyde and I and our four young oldest children were baptized in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But when Joseph Smith was killed and the church kind of dispersed, we figured we'd just get a head start on moving west. So we sold up our everything. We fixed up 3 fine wagons and we headed for the Oregon. I'll let Mrs. Hyde tell you a little bit about our journey west. Mrs. Hyde?
Yes. Thank you, Mr.
And we do have a microphone if you'd like to use it. I don't know if this is working. How do we do what do we do here? I don't understand these things. I never saw these things before in my life. Okay, yeah, there you go.
Well, now, folks, I don't know as I'm going to do too good holding on to this microphone. As you can tell, I have the shaken palsy. But there is a London doctor by the name of James Parkinson, and I understand he's trying to do some research on this shaken palsy. Let's hope that in your time they may be find a cure. But as Mr. I was asking for me to share I can't tell you all the perils that followed us, but I'll tell you where we left the Oregon Trail, and when we decided we weren't going to the Oregon, we decided we were going to go to California instead. A mountain man by the name of Caleb Greenwood, was a tall string bean fellow with a big full bushy beard. He was trying to tell everybody who had ears on around Fort Hall that instead of going to the Oregon, they really ought to go to California.
One of the mountain men is standing right back there in the back. Matter of fact, there he is.
There he is. Well, anyhow, this Mr. Greenwood, we later found out he was in the employ of Captain Sutter, who was in need of immigrant labor, so he was just kind of greasing the skids to get folks to come down that way. Well, we were some of those that were convinced. And so we went on our way with Mr. Greenwood as our pilot. Well, for most of that time from Fort Hall, now most of you folks, I understand there's a highway, goes by Elkins with Wells and Elko and Reno and all them places that weren't there when we were there. That's basically the way we went. But when we came smack down up against the Sierra Mountains, I tell you, we had a different story to tell. We had already crossed the Truckee River was it 23 times or 32?
I lost track after about 20, man.
And also we'd gone by what we call Truckee Lake, but I understand you folks call it Lake Tahoe. We'd get so close to the very edge of that with our wagons, the water come up nearly to our wagon beds. And those of us like me who don't know how to swim, I tell you, we were intimidated. But the biggest intimidation is when we came up against that wall of the Sierra. And our captain, he said, we were going to have to take our wagons all apart piece by piece and haul it up that way. Well, now Mr. I, being the Yankee he is, decided there must be a better way than that. And so he tried to convince others of that same mind that they could make a steep road, as it were, by taking out a few trees, moving some boulders and whatnot, and leveling it out as best they could. That's what they did. So at first they would take the oxen up one at a time, because you could imagine there were rocks, big, steep. In fact, it was so steep, they had to help those oxen up with ropes. And those poor oxen, those faithful oxen that had taken us so far for so long, they would slip and fall, and their knees all bloody. They left a trail of blood up those rocks as the folks were trying to get them up on the first level. And once they had 6 yoke of oxen, that's 12, they would take chains and ropes on down the descent and attach it to the wagons. And so, I don't know how I could make this clear.
Well, it's more sort of like an inclined plane. We just take it on up, and then the oxen pull the wagon as far as they could, and then we unhitch everything, bring them back, and then keep on until we got it up to the next level, and then we kept doing it over again.
Okay, on the ledge.
Yep, here comes that wagon pulling up as the oxen are going this way. That's how it worked. Yeah, it wasn't all that complicated.
Well, it only took 2 days. Sarah, my daughter, and I, we just walked up on our own. We packed most of our belongings, well, personal things that we needed, on the backs of the horses. But oh, what a trying time for man and animals.
But we got to California. We arrived at Sutter's Fort on the 25th of October, 1845. There we met up with a fellow by the name of Peter Lassen. Some of you may have heard of him. Yeah. And he knew I had a saw in my wagon. He said, hey, how about you come build me a sawmill up on Deer Creek, not too far from here. And he had a cabin, and winter was coming on. I thought, well, that sounds like a good plan. He's got a cabin already to move into. So I said, yes, sir, we'll make you that sawmill. Well, we got up there, no sooner we all moved into his cabin, and he shows up with a fellow Dane and kicked us out. I suppose blood is, in fact, thicker than water. So I got together with a fellow named Tobin and another fellow by the name of Belden, and we built ourselves a cabin real fast-like. There were like 14 or 16 of us. I lost track after a while. We spent that whole winter there together in that little old cabin. That one-room cabin. We got to know each other real well. Not too well. But Josiah Belden made a deal with me. He said when it comes spring, if I would go up to his rancho, the rancho of the Red Bluffs it was called, he said if we would go up there and take care of his cattle for 3 years, he would cede to me 1/2 of his rancho. We figured that was a pretty fine deal, so we went up there. I finished off the cabin he'd started there. It was a mighty fine cabin, and we were all settled in, and along comes an Indian agent with a note, purportedly from Captain Fremont. Now, we knew Fremont was in the area. He was with a topographical surveying party, although we had suspicions he was there for other purposes. We were kind of hoping that was the case, but we didn't much like some of the oppression we had to deal with here. You know, we Mormons, we were back in Missouri, and the governor issued an extermination order. We didn't like the idea of being exterminated, so we came out here, only to find out that there was talk of exterminating us here as well. Because this note that came to us said there was 250 Spanish soldiers headed north, burning the crops, driving off the cattle. They're going to kick us out of the land, make us leave without our guns, without our animals, to go back across those here. There's no way we're going to do that. Well, I went down to Captain Sutter, and he had a plan. He called it his glorious plan of conquest.
No, Sutter, you mean?
I always get those two fellas mixed up. Fremont was the fellow. Sutter was near there, but he was camped out at the place called the Buttes. You may know where that is. At any rate, his plan consisted of about 3 or 4 elements. He says he's going to first get a bunch of men who had nothing to lose. That already sounded bad to me. He said they're going to go commit depredations against the Mexican government, steal some of their animals, and force them to fire the first shot. After which, we would skedaddle back to the United States and let the war begin without us. I told him that was a dastardly, cowardly plan. I would have nothing to do with it. And that's when he called me a damned Mormon, with whose opinion was not only worth more than a dog's. In fact, he stamped out of his tent. He said, such talk is disorganized, and I'll have none of it. I'll tell you, man, was short as pie crust. Well, to make a long story short, about 30 of us got together. We headed down to Sonoma. We surrounded the garrison. We sent in 3 of our leaders in to work out articles of capitulation with General Vallejo. He wasn't general then, he later became a general. We sent in a fellow named Semple, a fellow named Knight to translate, and our leader was that old bear hunter. What was his name anyway?
Merritt.
Huh?
Merritt. No, I don't know.
Merritt, that's it, Merritt.
It was always...
Yeah. Well, that's the problem. That's the problem. They got in there and all we heard was a bunch of merriment and tinkling of glasses. That while Vallejo was flying into his finest brandies and wines. And then it got quiet. We sitting on our horses for an hour. Well, we decided we better send somebody else in to find out what's going on. So we sent in Grigsby, who came out with me. We did our wagon train together, coming out west. Same thing. A lot of laughter, merriment, tinkling of glasses, and then it got deathly quiet. At that point, the men turned to me, being a teetotal Mormon and all. They figured I might be impervious to the arduous spirits that was going on in that hacienda. So I went in there, and sure enough, there was that chuckle-headed Merritt, his head on his chin. Knight was well past being able to translate anything. And Semple, he was working on some articles of capitulation. I took one look at them, they would not do. I went back out to the men, and I told them, look, we're not getting anywhere here. At that point, everything fell apart. Some of the men said they're going to cut our throats. They're going to put us in jail for sure. One of the fellas said it was Merritt. He says, well, wait a minute. If Captain Fremont hasn't sanctioned what we're doing here, then I don't want anything to do with this. I'm going home. Well, at that point, I gave a little speech. I said, saddle no horses for me. I want no horses. We must either be mountain thieves or we must be conquerors. And then I quoted scripture at him. That always works pretty well. I said, choose ye this day what you will be. And I turned my back on them in disgust. That did the trick. They gathered around behind me. They rallied behind me and they made me their commander-in-chief. And so that's how I became commander-in-chief of the Bear Flag Republic. Well, one of the first things we needed to do, of course, was we needed a flag. Now, we couldn't very well raise the American flag, the stars and stripes, because we weren't agents of the government. So we made ourselves a flag. Miss Ryan, you want to help me show them this flag? It might look a tad familiar to some of you. There you go. That's the original bear flag. Although some of the Spaniards said they thought that bear looked more like a pig than a bear. My suspicion is how they may have a point. I think the one you got here is probably a little more legitimate bear, all right? Fellow by the name of Mr. Todd. Yeah, Michael. Yeah, Todd. Yeah, he was the nephew of some lady that married some fellow by the name of Abraham Lincoln. I don't suppose you ever heard of him. At any rate, that was our flag, and we lasted that republic. That independent republic lasted for all of, let's see now, 25 glorious days. Well, while I was down glorifying and writing proclamations and making the world safe for democracy, Mrs. I was back on the ranch. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what was going on while I was gone?
As you might imagine, the trials that we as pioneer women had to undergo, not only did we have to put up with pioneer fathers, but all of our work was twice as hard. Have you ever gone camping and you don't have any of the questions? The interpreter asked us if we belonged to Captain Sutter, and of course Sarah popped up and said, we belong to our pa. But they wanted to know how many cattle he had, and how many men he had, and all kinds of questions. We asked it as best we could. And then when they started taking down the guns on the side, on the pegs of the wall, then we really got anxious, as you might imagine. And they sighted those guns and they looked at them real carefully. We were glad that they put them back up on the pegs. And then there was some discussion back and forth between the interpreter and the chief. And they left as abruptly as they did when they come in the door, and off they went at a gallop, a whooping and a hollering. Well, it was just sunset. And we were feeling pretty uneasy because we didn't know what the Indians had planned, whether we were involved in it or not. So Sarah got on her horse. She was going to go up and find James up in Tehama, where he was trying to get what he could of the wheat crop in. But I thought, oh man, if she's taking, oh, how did that mannerism come into my, anyway. Oh, gracious sakes, there we go. I thought, this might be the last time I see my daughter Sarah. So I called after her, motioned for her to come back. I said, I don't want you going out 7 miles in the dark by yourself. Why don't I send the 2 boys across over the river here to go get our neighbor? And that's what the boys did. They got in their canoe, they went and got our close neighbor. They brought him over. And I tell you, it was a little bit of a comfort to know he was on hand. He also knew one of the women who had just come down from the Oregon, and she was familiar with that language that the Indians were speaking. Evidently, the chief's son had been down doing some business with Mr. Sutter, and he'd been shot. And that was like a year earlier, and so he was coming down to get justice. And he brought the means to do it. He wanted either one of Captain Sutter's men to shoot, or he wanted horses or cattle. But we were glad it wouldn't have to do with us. Well, our neighbor, he stayed with us that night, and in the morning he went on down the river and sent off word to the Sutter's fort, so they knew what was coming their way.
Well, it's about time for us to bite off, but I just wanted to say at the end here that Captain Fremont told a real stretcher when he started taking credit for all the bear flag business. He had nothing to do with it. He would not let Kit Carson, one of his main men, come with us. He wanted to come with us, and he wouldn't allow it. None of his men were involved in the bear flag revolt. Now, we were pretty revolting, I will admit that. But, put yourselves in our shoes. They're talking about exterminating you. I bet you'd want to do something about it, wouldn't you? Well, we didn't know it, but the United States had actually declared war against Mexico even before we began our revolt. We just hadn't got word yet. So we finished the business. We chased the Mexicans on down the coast and claimed California for the United States of America, as it is today, more or less. And I'll tell you one other thing about Mr. Fremont. I told you, you called me a damn Mormon. Whether we're damn Mormons or not, we'll have to wait till the other side to find out about that, whether we're damn or not. We'll find that out later. But he accused me of trying to absquatulate with California on behalf of Brigham Young. I told him that was a foul slander. We had nothing to do with Brigham Young. We certainly weren't about to try to take over California for anyone but except folks like you. Well, now, speaking of Mormons, I got to warn you about something. You're going to meet a bunch more of them tonight. Now, we're not here to Mormonify you or anything like that. Closest baptismal font's several blocks away. You're safe. But it just happened that a lot of Mormons came to California early on. You're going to meet some of them. Although Mrs. Wimmer, she ain't a Mormon. We're still working on her. I'd like to now introduce you to Mrs. Melissa. I forgot Miss. Well, we don't use first names much, you know. It's Mrs. Corey. But Mrs. Melissa Corey, who came with, well, I'll let you tell her story. She's got a very interesting story for you. So we're going to bite off now and let her take over. Mrs. Corey, you want to come up here? Oh, and if you ladies don't mind, I'm going to take my jacket off. I know that's rather improper, but I see as how this fellow right here left the cabin without even wearing his breeches today.
You can tell it must have been a fun time with Mr. Hyde back there. Good evening. My name is Melissa Burton Corey, and I led a very interesting and exciting and sometimes challenging life. And I'd like to tell you some of my experiences. I was born in Canada, and then when I was 10 years old, with my family, I was baptized into the Mormon church when we came to the United States. We first went to Missouri, and then we moved out to Nauvoo, Illinois. On the 22nd of June in 1846, I woke up excited that morning. It was my wedding day. I got dressed in a real hurry, and I snuck out of the tent, leaving my parents and my brothers sound asleep in dreamland. And I walked out and turned toward the east and watched the sun rise up over the top of the tents in Mount Pisgah, Iowa. And as I was standing there watching the beautiful sunrise, I was thinking about the time that we had spent in Nauvoo. We had a wonderful life there. It was peaceful and happy, and we just really enjoyed it. Until the 27th of June in 1844. That was the day that the prophet Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram were killed by a mob. It was a really sad day. The Mormon battalion, the Nauvoo Legion, was chosen to patrol the streets at night to keep us safe because we didn't know what was going to happen. And my brother Robert was a member of the battalion, of the Nauvoo Legion. One evening, he brought one of the members home with him, a man named William Corey. And when he introduced me to William Corey, William smiled at me when he took my hand, and it went straight to my heart. And now, 2 years later, we were going to be married. One evening, I was a young bride of only 18 when 4 days later the call came for the Mormon battalion. I knew that William was going to join up because he was a military man. And I was really rebellious because I didn't want to have him leave my side. I was accustomed to putting my faith in God and following the direction of our leaders, but I rebelled and did not want to leave my brand new husband. So I got to thinking, and then I realized that they were calling for volunteers for laundresses. Now, I know how to wash clothes. I've been doing it since I could remember. And so I decided that I would volunteer as a laundress and go along with my husband. William was called as a captain in Company B, and I was to be a laundress in the same company. I would be where I belonged, by my husband's side. I told him, I don't see why women have to stay behind and worry about their husbands while they're gone, when we could just march right beside them just as well. Our march to San Diego was a long one, 2,000 miles. I walked because I wanted to walk. My husband had to walk, and so I walked beside him. We marched to Council Bluffs, Iowa, and there we picked up some more volunteers. And then we went on to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and from there to San Diego. Many times we had very little food and water, but William and I got along quite well. Many of the men didn't plan very well. They would eat until they were satisfied, and then they would run out of food before we got to the next supply wagon. I had experienced and learned how to plan ahead. I would figure out in my mind how many days we had until we got to the next supply wagon and how much food we had, and I would divide it up and cook very sparingly and make sure that we didn't waste anything. We didn't have enough to eat all the time, but we didn't starve to death either. We had what we needed rather than all we wanted. I urged the men in the company to plan their meals and work that way too, but they didn't do that. Weary and footsore, we had to march for miles and miles. Often the men complained about being thirsty, and when you think about it, you get thirstier and thirstier. When I got thirsty, I tried not to think about it, and I learned a little secret. I would carry a little pebble in my mouth, and that would cause the saliva to flow more freely, and it would help to curb the unimaginable thirst that we had. When we reached Santa Fe, Captain Kirk decided that he was going to send the women, children, and sick men to Pueblo for the winter. I nearly lost my courage then, but not William. He and 2 others went to the colonel and talked him into letting the 4 women of Company B follow along with them to the west. But it was really a sad day when we had to say goodbye to our companions. At this time, I was expecting our first child, and the nausea of pregnancy was really making it difficult to travel. William tried to keep many of the trials of the trip from me, but I knew most of them, and I went through them with him. I was becoming completely fatigued and footsore when one day Colonel Cook, came along on his big white horse, and he saw how tired I was. So he got down off his horse and let me ride for a ways. And I was also able to ride in our wagon when I just got too tired to walk anymore. On January 15th, we marched 25 miles by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Some of the command didn't get there during the day. They arrived in the evening. They had been 3 days without water, and if it weren't for the fresh beef that we got when we stopped, we probably all would have perished. We had been without breadstuffs for days, and the worst part of it was, this was the worst place that we had encountered since we started out. The men were so used up from thirst, hunger, and fatigue that they couldn't talk. Their tongues were swollen and dark. And so they just really couldn't do anything. And we lost 16 wagons, 16 mules, and each man had only 4 ounces of his flour left. And there hadn't been any sugar or coffee for weeks. When we arrived at the Vallecito Creek, we rested. The women washed the clothes and the men cleaned their guns. And then an Indian rider came into camp and handed Colonel Cook a letter from the alcalde in San Diego welcoming us to California. And that evening there was some singing and fiddling and a little bit of dancing. Next we went to Warner's Ranch near Mount Palomar. It had been a hard day's march, and we only went 10 miles. We encountered one hill that was so impractical then to pass that the men rolled the larger rocks out of the way so that we could go by, and we followed the path up a creek to the top of a narrow pass. And then we had to break up the rocks with axes so that we could reach the top of the mountain where we camped. On January 29th, 1847, we reached Mission San Diego. And William and I, with others of the battalion, thought our journey was through. But after a few days, we were ordered to go to Mission San Luis Rey and do garrison duty and protect that place from the Indians. However, in about 6 weeks, we were sent back to San Diego, and we camped there at Old Town. In July, we marched to San Diego. There, the Marmon Battalion was disbanded. And when William was discharged, we decided that we would go back and head back to Salt Lake Valley. But we had to stay for a while, so when he mustered out, because we needed to get the means to go on the trip, and we started traveling north after having bought a wagon and some horses. We traveled up the coast to Monterey, and there on the 2nd of October, our son was born. He only lived for a few days, and we buried him in a little cemetery there in Monterey. When I was able to travel again, we started out. This was really a hard trip. There were no roads, and we had to pick our way as best we could. In one place, we came to a gorge so narrow that we couldn't drive our wagons through it. We had to take them apart and carry them through a piece at a time and then put them back together again. When we got to Sutter's Mill, we found out that gold had been discovered, and some of the Mormon Battalion boys stayed there. But we wanted to get to the Salt Lake Valley. But we had to stay there and get the means to travel again. So we stayed for a while. And then on a Monday, our company decided to leave. And there was a bunch of us from the battalion that went. Our group consisted of 45 men, 1 woman, me, and 2 cannons, 17 wagons, 150 mules, and about the same number of cattle. We chose the Carson Pass route rather than going the other way because we wouldn't have to cross the Truckee River numerous times. It took us 6 weeks to build a road across that pass. We were the first wagons to travel it, and we were the first travelers to go from west to east. The worst night I spent on this part of the trip was in Nevada. 5 men were chosen to go ahead and find the best route and come back and report to us. But we were never heard of them again. So we just kept on going. And one evening about dusk, we came upon the bodies of the 5 men. They had been killed by Indians with poison arrows, thrown in a gulch, and just covered with underbrush. We buried the bodies and made camp and settled down for the night. But we were afraid of being attacked again by the Indians. And so every once in a while, we'd periodically fire the cannon. But that did us more harm than it did anybody else because the noise of it stampeded the horses. And they all ran off, and we had a hard time getting them back together, and some of them never came back. This was the second time I had watched the building of a road, the first being the last 700 miles to San Diego. I got to watch another building as we got closer to the Salt Lake Valley, and we built one across the Salt Lake Cutoff Pass before entering the valley. Altogether, I witnessed the building of 1,000 miles of road. We arrived in Salt Lake City in December of 1848, and once we got there, we were glad. On February 9th, 1849, our daughter Melissa was born. And about 3 weeks later, my husband took very ill, and he passed away. 2 years later, I married a man named William H. Kimball, and together we had 6 children. In my later years, I made a trip back to California, visiting the places I had been so many years before. I stopped in San Luis Rey Mission and talked to the priests. I also visited Monterey and looked for the grave of my little baby, but the cemetery had changed, and I never did locate him. On a bright, sunny morning on July 24th, 1897, I sat in a rocking chair on my porch, all dressed in my best black satin dress, with a black hat tilted on my head and black satin gloves on my hands, waiting for a carriage. Finally, the carriage came, and I climbed in, and a few minutes later, several other carriages were behind me, and we started the parade. We drove down the broad streets. There were people excited and happy on the sides of the street watching us go by and waving at us, and I waved at a little boy who was sitting on the curb. He waved back at me, and then he turned and looked at his mother and said, "Why is Grandma riding in the parade?" We were being honored as the first immigrants into the Salt Lake Valley. In 1907, a reporter interviewed me and told me that he thought I had a very interesting life, and I agreed. And he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, I just want to sit here in my little home and enjoy the peace and quiet. And that's what I did. Then on September 21st, 1903, at the age of 75, I felt really weary and tired. And so I went and laid down on my bed. And a few minutes later, I quietly slept and went to sleep and died there in my little house on the street.
Melissa Corey is one of the very few women who've had a mountain peak named after her. Right there in Immigration Pass is the Melissa Corey Peak this day. Now we're going to hear from another member of the Mormon Battalion, Mr. Henry Bigler, Mr. Henry William Bigler.
I don't need this. A lot of you folks out here, aren't there? Thanks.
You need that.
Yeah, I probably will. As I get older, I get more forgetful, and I'm really getting old. I was born. You say I might need that thing?
You're sounding pretty good right now.
Well, good evening, folks.
Good evening.
My name is Henry William Bigler.
Wait a minute, Henry.
Now,
Wait
you already-
a minute, Henry. Wait a minute, Henry. Either use it or put it down. It's not doing any good if you hold it down.
Well, if I have to need,
All right.
I'll use it. Where was I? Oh yeah, I'm glad to be here, folks. I came to California with a bunch of boys that was recruited to fight in the Mexican-American War in 1846. We had a pretty tough time getting here. The trail was hard. We had to walk all the way, and we were just farmers. We weren't soldiers. We were just farmers. And so it was pretty tough getting here. We were part of a religious group called Mormons, as has been said here tonight. And we were driven from our home in Illinois by mobs who, for some reason, took major offense to us. And they forced us to leave there. And so we were on the trail. We were hunkered down in a town called Council Bluffs. You folks call it Omaha. And this feller from the United States Army came riding in, and he said he wanted to recruit 500 men to form a battalion to go fight the Mexicans in California. Well, you can imagine how we felt about that. That wasn't our idea of a good time, for one thing, but even more, we were a little bit concerned, I guess you could say, about the government coming to us and wanting us to go fight for them. I mean, after all, we had been driven from our homes in Illinois and in Missouri, and the government didn't lift a finger to help us. And not only that, when our leader was taken off to jail on trumped-up charges, there were no help from the government. And so this fella from the government comes and he wants us to sign up and go fight for him. It didn't set too well with most of the boys there. But because our leaders were inspired and they had the wisdom that lots of us didn't have, they told us that if we would go fight, it would benefit us in two ways. First of all, it would prove our loyalty to this great country. We would show them that we were really loyal to the country. The second thing it would do, as soldiers, we got paid. They paid us to be soldiers. And so we could send our money back to our relatives and our loved ones who were still on the trail. So it was a pretty good idea to join up. And that's what we did. It only took that feller 3 weeks to recruit 500 guys. Well, the 500 of us left, and we were headed down towards Council.
Fort Leavenworth.
Yeah, that's where it was, Fort Leavenworth, to receive our guns and ammunition and other things and supplies. And when we got there, that's what happened. We received it. The leader that came, or the gentleman that came and recruited us, was our leader from Council Bluffs to Fort Leavenworth, but he took sick. And so the Army assigned a feller to be our leader who didn't like Mormons. He didn't like Mormons one bit. And not only that, he brought a doctor along with him that liked Mormons even less. This doctor treated the men, and they claimed, a lot of the men claimed, that he was actually trying to poison them. The medicine that he fed them was chamomile and arsenic. Fed to them in a rusty old spoon that was never washed, was never cleaned or anything. And so you can imagine that maybe they thought that he might have been trying to get rid of them. So, but we marched on. We left Fort Leavenworth and we marched down to Santa Fe, headed towards Santa Fe. And the second day out, the second day that we were out, they cut our rations in half. We went from full rations one day to half rations the next day. And we marched to Santa Fe on half rations. We made it. We made it. They wanted us to walk all the way 2,000 miles. 2,000 miles they wanted us to walk. Well, you can imagine how we felt about that. But we didn't grumble. There was no grumbling, no complaining, no troubles or anything like that. We just went on. We made it to Santa Fe, And when we got to Santa Fe, we got a new leader. Thank goodness. The new leader's name was Philip St. George Cook. He was a colonel. And he was a stern man, but he was fair. He treated us good. He treated us fairly, which is all we were asking. That's all we wanted. The Army gave him some orders when they got to Santa Fe, and that was that they were to build a road from Santa Fe to the Pacific Ocean. A total of 700 miles, like Mrs. Corey told you. During this time, after the road was completed, that road was used by thousands and thousands of immigrants coming west from the east, coming west to mine gold in California. It was one of the most used roads that was ever used, that was ever made. And so we did some real good there. In addition, well, when we finally made it to California, we came over a hill, and there before us was the Pacific Ocean. Let me tell you folks, seeing the Pacific Ocean for the very first time was one of the most glorious sights I have ever seen. Ever. It was beautiful. It was gorgeous. Most of us had never even seen an ocean. Didn't even know what an ocean was, most of us. But there it was. And you can imagine how we felt. We had just come 700 miles across the desert. Imagine how we felt about seeing the Pacific Ocean after coming 700 miles. Well, we had signed up at the time for 1 year of duty in the Army, and we still had a few months left to go. When we got to Santa Fe, or got to San Diego, we still had a few months left to go. And so they put us on what they called garrison duty, which meant we just protect things. Whatever they wanted us to do, we'd do it, and we'd protect them and take care of them. And so that's what we were assigned to do. Some of our group, some of the battalion, marched north to Los Angeles, and they established a fort. They built a fort up there in Los Angeles. Another group, the group that I was in, stayed in San Diego. Now, the men in San Diego had a pretty good deal because they were able to work while in their free time, they were able to go out and get jobs and send money back to their loved ones on the trail. But the ones up north in Los Angeles, they didn't allow them to do that. And those guys got in a bit of trouble because they had a lot of free time. They had plenty of free time. And so they got themselves into some pretty good scrapes and some pretty good trouble. But the boys down in San Diego had the opportunity to work. And work we did. We built wells and buildings and all that kind of stuff. The water supply in San Diego was poor, to say the least, was very poor, because the wells were so shallow. They had just bad water. And so as the battalion boys got there and were able to go to work, they started digging wells, and they dug wells. And one other thing that the battalion boys were good at, that they had done, was they knew how to burn bricks. They knew how to make bricks. And so they lined these wells with bricks. And they made good, fresh water wells that worked good. I think, as I recall, they made somewhere around, I think it was 44 wells. And they, some of them are maybe even still there today. The other thing that they did was they were able to build buildings there in San Diego. And one of the buildings that they built, one of the first buildings that they built was a courthouse. They made it out of bricks. And that courthouse still stands today. So that's one of the things they did. 4 men, 4 of the battalion boys, burnt over 40,000 bricks. And the way that the reason that they did that, they learned how to do that when they were back in Nauvoo. In Nauvoo, bricks were important things. Most of the houses back there are brick houses, and so that's where they learned how to do it. Well, we got discharged, and after we had spent a year, we got discharged from the Army, and some of the boys went directly east to find their families. Some of them went up north to go to come up this way. From San Diego, they came up north, and then they were going to turn and go east. Well, while the boys that were coming up north had the opportunity to go to work for a feller named Sutter. This feller was building a grist mill, and he needed logs for his mill to make it. And so down the road a piece, they set up a sawmill. They built a sawmill, and the Mormon boys were employed to go and dig a trench from the American River down to the sawmill to bring water down so they could turn the saw and cut the wood. And so that's what they were doing. While we were doing that, one of the boss of the mill happened to be out checking our work one day, and he glanced down, and on the rocks in the tail race, the ditch that was being dug, he saw something shining. He reached down and picked it up, and lo and behold, he thought it was gold. Well, he brought it in and told us he thought he had found a gold mine, and we said, "Yeah, likely story. Those kind of things never happen to us." And so he told one of the men and me to go up and dam the race up, and the next day he went out and checked it out, and sure enough, it was gold. We looked at it. We thought we had never seen gold before, but it was pretty close, and so he found the gold. A few weeks later, they found an even bigger strike, an even bigger gold strike down near Coloma in a place called Mormon Island, and it was a much bigger strike down there that they had discovered. And you know what happened from there. The days of 49, or the gold rush of 49 happened, and thousands upon thousands. In fact, probably some of you folks, your descendants were part of the gold rush, and they became gold miners. A few years after they discovered gold, there was some contention about exactly when the gold was discovered and by who. I was able, because I was in the habit of keeping a journal, I was able to get in touch with a prominent editor of a large newspaper and send him my journal and settle the situation. Gold was discovered in California, January the 24th, 1848, by a feller named James Marshall. That's what my journal said. That's what they went by. And from that time on, that's who discovered and when gold was discovered. So let me tell you, folks, if the opportunity were to arise again for me to do the same thing that I did then and sacrifice, and I'll tell you for sure it was a major sacrifice on our part, on each one of the Mormon Battalion boys. It was a sacrifice. If it came again for me to show my love for this country, my love for my God, and my support of the leaders of the church, I would do it again in a second. In a heartbeat, I would do it again. And so I'm glad that I had the opportunity to do that. I'm especially glad that I had the opportunity to come here and to visit with you folks tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bigler. There was a woman who was involved in the discovery of gold. Most of you probably don't know much about her. In fact, she was the cook for the Mormon battalion. They told me they didn't much care for a cook, and maybe she'll explain that to you. Anyway, go on up, Mrs. Wimmer, and tell us your story, will you?
Hi there. As Mr. Ike mentioned, there is one person that is not in Mormon that we're telling about tonight, and that's Mrs. Wimmer. That would be me. I was a Methodist, so here I am a Methodist. So let me tell you a little bit about my story. You've already heard that I was involved in finding gold. I was born Elizabeth Jane Cloud in 1822 in Virginia. Well, my pa, he was a tobacco planter. He was doing right well until he lost most of what he had because of a dishonest partner. So at the age of 16, we packed up what we had left, and we moved to Lumpkin County, Georgia. Well, Lumpkin County, Georgia was having a gold rush. And my pa and my brother, they worked in the gold mines, and my ma and I, we ran a boarding house and an eating establishment for the miners. But I went out and I did my own prospecting whenever I had time. And I got pretty good at recognizing that gold ore. So, about 1840, around 1840, I married Obadiah Biggs. And he and I decided to move to Missouri. In Missouri, we had a little farm, and we were raising a couple of boys. We had a couple of boys by then. And our good friends were Peter and Polly Wimmer. They just lived down the road from us, and they had 5 children. Well, the year of 1843 was not a good year. Both my Obadiah and Polly Wimmer died of the ague. And the following year, 1844, Peter Wimmer and I were married. And so at the age of 22, I was the mother of 7 children. Well, we stayed there for a couple more years, and then in 1846, Mr. Wimmer's brother-in-law decided he was going to go to California. So he was getting up a wagon train to head for California, and we decided we would join that train. So we traveled for 6 long months getting to California. We were so glad to arrive there. We ended up at Mr. Sutter's Fort in California, and my Peter, he decided he was going to go fight the Mexicans, so he left me there with the 7 children. Like a man, right? Well, he didn't stay gone for long because he got injured and he had to come back. And he decided he would work for Mr. Sutter. Well, as someone was saying, Mr. Sutter was growing wheat, and he needed a grist mill in order to grind that wheat. And in order to build a grist mill, he needed some good lumber. So he went into business with Mr. James Marshall, and they found an area up about 40 miles from Sacramento, or from Sutter's Fort. And at that location, it was an area called Columa. And so my Peter, he was hired as an assistant to Mr. Marshall. I was hired as, guess what? The cook and the laundress. So we moved on up there. It took us a couple of weeks to get up there. And they built us a cabin. They built a cabin very hasty cabin. There, one side of it was from the family, our family, and the other side was for those who were hired to work for Mr. Marshall. And that was Mr. Bigler and a few of his cohorts from the Mormon Battalion, and a few Indians. So we moved on in there, and they built that cabin so hastily, they just basically dug a pit for me to do the cooking in. Plus, they didn't put a chimney in. So cooking was intolerable inside, and I tried to do cooking outside as much as weather would permit. So, and they complained a lot about the food. Now let me tell you, that they always complained that my family got the best. Well, they was always late for dinner. What did they expect? My family would always get the best. So anyway, moving on. They were doing really well with the building the sawmill until they realized that the mill race was the sawmill was too low, and the mill race wasn't deep enough, and that's when they started digging that mill race a little deeper. Mr. Marshall went out every day to check it, see how the water was going through it, and as Mr. Bigler said, on January 24th, 1848, Mr. Marshall went out and he saw something sparkling there in the water and picked it up and thought it was gold. Well, this is the part nobody tells you, because my husband was there and he said, you know, Mrs. Wimmer's up at the cabin and she knows about gold because she was digging up gold in Georgia. So they sent that nugget up to me, and I was up there and I was mixing up, had to make my own soap, you know, couldn't buy my own laundry soap. So mixing up my soap, which had lye in it, and they brought me that gold and I said, this is gold. And if this is gold, it'll be gold in the morning. I dropped it in my lye soap. And I just left it there and I mixed it up, put it up on the shelf to cool for the evening. The next morning at breakfast, one of the guys lifted his head up from eating breakfast and he says, what did I hear about gold being found? And Mr. Marshall says, well, ask Mrs. Wimmer. So I said, well, it's in my soap. So we got the soap down, we had to break it into chunks because it was hard by then. No gold. But down at the bottom of that pot was some potash, and so I lifted it up with my two hands, and there it was, that gold just as bright and shiny as when I put it in there. So I knew it was gold. Mr. Marshall, he wasn't so sure. Maybe being a woman, he didn't think I knew what I was talking about. I don't know. Anyway, he took it on down to Sutter's Fort, to Mr. Sutter, and they did some more testing on it, and sure enough, it proved to be gold. Well, Mr. Sutter wanted it to be kept quiet. So he gave everybody a pocket knife in order to, swear them to silence. Well, how do you think that worked? Not so good. If it's something like that, it's going to be hard to keep secret. So pretty soon those boys were telling some of their friends at the grist mill, and people started showing up with picks, shovels, and whatever else they could find. They started looking for the gold. But it was my own son that really spilled the beans, because we had a teacher come up from Sutter's Fort. He had a load of supplies for us. My son started telling him, oh, we found gold here. And the guy goes, you didn't find gold. It was probably fool's gold. That got me a bit riled, because he's not believing my son. So I showed him some of the gold. I even gave him some chunks of gold. Well, what do you think? He went right straight down to Sutter's Fort, to James Marshall's store, and he told him gold's been found up there at Coloma. Well, after that, Charles, who owned the store, the guy who owned the store, was a good friend, Mr. Samuel Brannon, you're going to be meeting in a minute. Yeah, Charles Smith, yeah. Anyway, he told Mr. Brannon. Now, Mr. Brannon was living in San Francisco, and he had come on the ship Brooklyn with a bunch of Mormons, so he was a Mormon as well. He also brought with him a printing press, and he was printing a little newspaper every once in a while. He was in the process of building newspaper printing newspaper right then, and he decided he was going to add a little blurb in there about gold being found. And where do you think he sent that? He sent that back east. The word got out. Everyone started coming. By 1849, there were people just pouring into California looking for the gold. Well, poor Mr. Sutter, his life was never the same after that. And neither was Mr. Marshall's. You know that people followed Mr. Marshall around thinking he knew where all the gold was? The poor guy, I mean, he was always being harassed. Show us the gold, where are the gold mines? He goes, I don't know, I just found that one in the, in the dirt. And after that, his life was just never the same. And of course, poor but Mr. Sutter, people came and they had no idea what property rights were, and so they started, getting on his property and killing his animals, and so his life was never the same either after that. Now, my husband and I, we stayed on there for many years. We decided not to, go for the gold. We grew vegetables and grew an apple orchard and a peach orchard and raised pigs and had 4 more children. And we stayed there for quite a while. Then in the 1860s, we moved on to Valley Center, California. And I have to tell you, Mr. Marshall actually gave me that nugget back. He called it the Wimmer nugget. And for about 40 years, I carried it around in a little pouch so I could show people that nugget. But in 1877, I sold that for $5,000. I did not know.
Got two more for you to hear from. First of all, it's going to be a feller that he thinks he's kind of a ladies' man, so just bear with him. Bit of a scoundrel, I'll tell you right now, but he was the state's first millionaire, Mr. Samuel Brannan.
Well, once you know that's all true, I think you ladies will find me quite dashing. True. Even in my 70s, I look pretty dapper. My name is Samuel Brannan, and my mother used to whisper in my ear that I was good looking, and then I didn't really believe her until the girls started following me around, and I knew I was. It was a lot of fun to have people kind of thinking you're good looking, and I really was. Didn't have too many years back in those days, but I was. Anyway, I'll just tell you, I was born in Maine. My dad was in his 50s. My mother just turned 29. And he was a father from hell. I ain't kidding. What? He had a cane, and he caned us anytime he felt like it. And we got so whipped, you wouldn't believe it. My older brother took off, and he picked on my older sister and told her how ugly she was. And finally, at age 27, because this was kind of an old age for a girl to get married, she got married when she was 29 and 27. Use that. Anyway, my mother let me escape with her, and I became a passenger with them, and they moved on over to Ohio. And anyway, while they were there, they got caught up in this thing about Mormonism and got all excited, and they joined that church. And I don't know if I believed it, but it looked like a pretty good thing. I had a lot of nice people there. Anyway, my mother enrolled me, paid for me to get an apprenticeship with a printer, because she wanted me to be a Benjamin Franklin. Because Benjamin Franklin had a printing shop here and there, and he actually was the first person to have a chain store of shops, and so we became quite well to do, and that's what her plan was for me, to be real rich. And I kind of thought that was a good idea, don't you? Yeah. Well, after 4 years, it was supposed to last 5 years, I learned how to spell. I could form sentences, and I understood the business of printing. So I asked my mom if she wouldn't mind sending a few dollars more overnight to get out of that apprenticeship and move on. She did it. After 4 years, I learned how to do it. Anyway, I did some good things there, and then finally my sister thought I should join up with the church, and because I was, flirting with all the females around, and she thought I had to get married. Well, I met a girl there. Her name was Harriet Hatch. Boy, Well, she was a looker, I'll tell you what. She was a good-looking girl, and I married her, she was 15. Probably being 15, that's when we got married. That's what my problem, my older sister, actually had to wait till she was 29. She was an old lady. Anyway, you know, it was really nice to start with until she started getting fat lady. And she got quite ornery. I guess she was a good child of what it was all about. So I moved out. I got out there as good as I could, you know. She said she wished she hadn't married me, and I said the same thing. So I moved on back to New York. And there somehow I got hooked up with the Mormons again and talked them into starting a printing press. We started a magazine or a paper called The Prophet. Joseph Smith gave us some money to get that started, and it worked out pretty good. Anyway, I want you to know that I was the first millionaire in California. And I was wealthy. I hobnobbed with royalty, and I knew all kinds of rich people in California, and I knew that was the place to be. Anyway, it turned out that Joseph got killed by a mob, and so I thought the whole thing was going to end, but it didn't. Brigham Young got a hold of me. He liked my enthusiasm. He said, "Why don't you be in charge and give me a boat and rent it up and get it all retrofitted for passengers and see if you can get people to go around the Horn instead of going across." I know Joseph talked about going out into Georgia, and so I did. I got 218 people to go, and we had enough supplies for 500 people. We had guns in case there were any desperados, what they call them, pirates on the high seas. Anyway, we didn't come across anything, but we had the guns. And so when we got to the Sandwich Islands, which is now called Hawaii, they wouldn't let us come aboard because of our guns. It took us a long time to get around, but we had a printing press, we had paper that lasted 2 years. We had all kinds of implements, all kinds of things. So when we landed in California, I had made a deal with Brigham Young that as soon as I landed, I would go back and meet with the saints coming across the plain. So I got my people all organized, and we started a community in New Hope, which became Stockton, and then Sonoma, and a few other places. And they started farming. Then I went back, horseback, all the way across, and I met Brigham Young at South Pass, which is pretty close to, what was the name of the rapper? Bridger, yeah, Jim Bridger. We went to his fort, we talked, and I said, you know, if we come on out to California, that place is a wonderful place. The climate is so wonderful, we could grow crops like crazy there. He said, well, I'm not interested in becoming wealthy. I want my saints to grow and become good Latter-day Saints. And he said he wasn't going to go to California. I thought, God, I can't believe that. Anyway, I hung out with him until he got into the Great Basin, where Salt Lake was, and it was a mess there. I mean, there was nothing growing. It was the desert. But that's where he wanted to raise the people, and so I decided in my mind that I was going to go back to California and start my own kingdom. And so I went back, and I got things going. And, you know, being I was assigned as a presiding elder in California, I took in tithing from the people, from the Mormon battalions, and from the people in ship, so they paid 10% of all their earnings. Pretty good deal, huh? Well, I was supposed to send that back to Brigham Young to help finance the church back in the state of Deseret. But I kind of felt like where I was going to start my own, I'd keep that for myself. So, then I got to thinking, if we was going to have a true religious group back here, that I probably ought to build a temple like they always would build a temple. So I asked the saints, I said, you need to give me an extra 10% for the temple. Oh man, they didn't know about that. They did. Then I said, I actually need 1 more tenth. So for, administrative purposes. And so I was getting 30%. Well, Brigham Young heard about that. He didn't like that so well. So he sent a guy by the name of Parley P. Pratt, who was an apostle, there came on to talk to me to gather in the money. And I told him I wasn't going to give it to him. I said, if you brought an affidavit from God, I was going to get it. And so he made a little prophecy. He prophesied that I would die a poor man. Well, I'll come to that. Anyway, it turned out that I had all this extra money, and I made some deals with John Sutter, and there was rumor of gold being found and so forth, but we wanted to keep it kind of hush-hush. And even though some rumors got out and some people went out there and found gold, still the majority of people in San Francisco did not believe there was much gold out there, so there wasn't much things going on. In fact, when we landed in San Francisco, it was called Yerba Buena. Remember that as a cool island there called Yerba Buena. It was good tea. I don't think I am or not, but anyway, so there was only 500 people living there, 50 people come to think of it, and us Mormons kind of outnumbered everybody. But anyway, there we were, and so with this money and stuff, we were going to start a kingdom. And so we were trying to keep it quiet. So John Sutter was trying to get his land grant with the Mexican government set up so that the people wouldn't be jumping his planes. And so then I got to thinking, we don't want the word out too fast, because I don't want to find gold, I just want to be rich. And so what I did is I sent some of my people to gather in some pans. We bought hundreds of pans, and I only paid 8 cents for them. And guess how much I sold them for? That's right, $20. I was going to add that up, but I don't have a calculator. Anyway, that's a pretty big, that's what I did. And I set up a store at Sutter, and I had 4 stores all together, and Mr. Smith kind of run for me. It said Smith and Company, I was the company. And it wasn't long, I was rich. I mean, I had things going. I had a plantation in Hawaii. The Mexican government actually gave me 1 million acres. I found out it was not in the capital state, but down there in Mexico. And another thing, my wife, because of all this money, she wanted to have our kids schooled in France. And so we sent her over there with the kids to school while she was gone. And I found a beautiful woman. Her name was Lola. Whoa, man, they called her Fire-Belly Nellie. And anyway, she hung out with me quite a bit. She was my lover. And then, people heard about it. And I got imported grapes, and we started grapes up in Napa Valley. And when I got to Napa Valley, I had my own winery and a distillery and all kinds of stuff going on. And we had a lot of hot pots up there at a place called, we changed the name to Calistoga. And how we got that name was, because I really liked Saratoga back in New York. And then they had a real nice place over in France that I found out was really nice too. And I was really enamored by the mud pots and all that stuff. And so I was going to call it Saratoga, California. But when I got up to declare that at the meeting we were going to call the name of it, I was kind of imbibed too much. And so I got confused, called it Calistoga instead of Saratoga, California. So that's how we got the name Calistoga. Anyway, so and I also had a railroad built from Sonoma all the way up there, people could get there. That got me a lot of bucks too. Anyway, when I went up to Calistoga one time, I financed a guy to build a mill there. And he couldn't do much good with it, and he abandoned it in the crop. And there was a Snyder guy that was a bully of the town had taken possession of it. And the constable came to him and he said, "Hey, someone's taken over your mill." And he said, "No one takes over my mill." I said, "Let's go get him." He said, "Well, he's a bully. He's got a gun." Well, I did too. I had a gun. And the constable had a gun. So we had a shootout. I got hit 8 times. That's why I was carrying this cane around, because my left arm kind of went bottom. I had a hard time walking, but nonetheless, we took the battle to him and he fled. And I got the mill back. Well, about that time, my wife comes back from France, and she heard about Lola. And so she sued for divorce. Well, in the courts, they found out that I was worth $2 million back in that day. I don't know how much that would be today, but that's
60 million today.
60 million, is that all?
Oh.
I was well to do. Anyway, she won the battle, and so back then she got half the money, which meant she got $1 million. But I was land wealthy. I didn't have that kind of cash. I had, like I said, I owned a third of Saratoga, not Saratoga, but Sacramento. I owned a third of Sacramento, half of the land in San Francisco, the plantation, and I thought I was wealthy. But anyway, by the time I got out that $1 million in cash, I was bankrupt, basically. I was really hurt. And And from there, things just didn't work for me at all. I had all kinds of trouble. And, you know, California went on by itself, you know. There was gold, but the gold died out, but the 49s were here. And anyway, just like Parley P. Pratt said, I didn't do so well at the end of my life. I was down there selling pencils in San Diego. Yeah, that's true. But I mustered up a little bit of courage, and I bought a fig farm. I really didn't pay for it, but I got it. And I had a Mexican girl who kind of liked me, and so she kind of helped me out a little bit with my injuries, and we was able to farm some. And then somehow the Mexican government sent me $49,000 that they owed me in interest. And I go, wow, what a thing that is, you know. So I went up to San Francisco to let everybody know that I was wealthy again. And so I had a great big feed, and I paid off some of my debts. Then I moved back down to San Diego, and I had a couple of gold coins. And I told my little mistress there, I said, now when I die, I want you to put these in my hand so the prophecy of Parley P. Pratt won't come to pass. But when I died, I was so poor they didn't have enough money to put a marker on my grave. My name is Samuel Brent.
Our last speaker for this evening is this lady right over here. She's pretty darn famous. They even there. You're talking back here in the museum. So without further ado, Miss Olive Oakman.
Well, I feel very privileged to be here, and I couldn't believe there was a sign that came and you could look at it. And I could look at it. Well, I'm really happy about that. I want to let you know that I am the first tattooed woman in the whole United States. The first one! And I am here to tell you my story. And if you're interested enough, you can go back on your computers these days and you can read more about it in more detail because it is unbelievable. It's a life of adventure, of lots of trials and lots of happiness and lots of joy and tragedy. That's what it's all about. I was 13 years old. I had 6 brothers and 6 sisters, and my mom and dad all got baptized in the Mormon church, and we were so happy. And then the prophet died, and confusion was everywhere. I really didn't know quite what to do. My father finally decided that we would go on a wagon train and head to the promised land, but it wasn't where Brigham Young was going. We went somewhere else. Well, that journey took 1,500 miles and 9 months. Well, my mom must have been pregnant when we started, because when the 9-month mark came, she was ready to deliver. And at that 9-month mark, after traveling all that way and wearing out 5 pairs of shoes, we were in a situation that I didn't think we'd ever be in. I know my dad was really upset, and my mother was trying to keep things calm. But we had run out of basically food and thought that the last station there, we would be able to stock ourselves up and keep going to the promised land, wherever that was. Well, he was so agitated, and my mom, you know, ready, probably in labor, but I didn't know it. And we took off. We left the whole company behind. They were too tired. They were a little bit wiser than we were, and we took off all by ourselves. It felt really weird to be all alone. And we were going down by the Gila River. We came to this plateau, and it looked like a good spot to camp. So we all camped that night, got ready, and started to fix our supper. We ended up with about 4 ounces of flour with water, cooked on the stove, and that was it. We were running out of food. So we ate our food. We were happy. We were glad we were together, but we were scared, and it was dark. You will not believe what came into the camp. 17 warrior Indians, Tokape. Our hearts just sunk. And my dad, you could tell, was trying to figure out what to do. He tried to get his confidence up because he knew Spanish, and he knew that most of the Indians in that particular area knew Spanish. So he went up and he hoped that they did too, and he started talking to them, and he found out they were hungry. Them too. So he thought, oh boy. So he said, we'll fix you what we can. And we all helped. We cooked them the same thing we had. And they ate it. And of course, did that feel like a strong Indian warrior? Nope, they asked for more food. And my dad said, can't do. And I don't know why he didn't pull his gun out or do something. So they huddled him away from our wagon over the corner. And I noticed that they were taking out something. They all had something. They were running, talking it all up. And then all of a sudden, bam, they ran through our camp. 17 warriors. One of them grabbed me, and I couldn't move. One grabbed my sister Mary Ann, and I was 13 and she was 7. And they held us. And why they didn't kill us, I have no idea. They were in 1 minute flat. They killed every single one of my family. My mother in labor, holding a 2-year-old, dead like that. And we watched that happen, and we were horrified. Well, there was no mercy for us. We couldn't believe we weren't dead. And so off they took us in the dark. And they took my shoes off, took Mariana's shoes off, and we had to walk on rocks, and our feet were bleeding, and we weren't used to that. We always had shoes on. They were going to take us 125 miles to their camp in a couple of days, and traveled like the wind. And I was bleeding, I was crying. My sister was crying and collapsing. She was too little to do a jaunt like that. It was too much for her. And so I figured they were just going to kill her. Well, one Indian picked her up, threw her over the shoulder, and they kept going. And there we went until we got to camp. When we got to camp, and I was used to living in organization, we were organized a lot more than what that camp was, and I thought, this looked like a trash pile. Oh my gosh. These Indians did not ever prepare for the future. They lived like animals. They treated their women like dogs. The men would buy the food and bring it to the women. They would have to gut it, cut it, cook it, feed it to them. They'd eat till they were too full. And whatever was left over, the women got to eat. But we were the captives. Guess what we got to eat? The gristle on the bone. That was it. So we were digging for roots. We didn't even know. We couldn't stand anything that they ate because it tasted horrible to us. Well, we were beat every day with a stick. All the time we were beat. Do this, do that, do that. And we couldn't understand it. We hadn't learned the language, but it didn't take us long to learn the language. We needed to communicate. And the kids would put their sticks in the fire, and it made them hot, and poke us and laugh, and poke us and laugh, poke us and laugh. It was not fun. The only thing that got me and my sister through that whole entire year with them, with the people that killed my whole family, was the fact that we prayed, sang hymns, and just cuddled together. And we were always cold, we were always hungry, we were always sad. It was horrible. Well, we didn't know what was going to happen. Some Mojave Indians, 150 miles away, happened to be friends with the Chocopee Indians. They heard that there was 2 white girls that were in their camp, and that they were being treated terrible. So, the Indian chief sent some of his warriors over to the camp, traded for us, and they gave them horses, blankets, and food, which they needed back. And we were so happy to get out of there, but we had no idea what would happen to us, right? You would know what would happen to you. And then Mojave spoke a different dialect of the language, so we again did not know what they were saying. So we did, we knew it was gonna happen. A couple days, we're gonna be going and running and going and running until we finally reached their camp. Well, when we reached their camp, it was a shock to me. The Indian chief took us into his tent, and they fed us, and they clothed us, they gave us blankets, they helped us every bit, and they loved us. And we didn't know if we'd ever feel loved again. The chief treated us like he was our adopted dad, and his wife treated us like the adopted mom, and we were so happy. And we had kids, other kids too, so we had brothers and sisters. How wonderful is that? And these Indians were smarter, and they had food, and they knew how to plant, and my dad was a farmer, and I could help them in the production of how to make more food so they can even get along better in the wintertime. So it all worked out great. And it worked out so great that 2 years after we were in that village, I got tattooed. That's how I got tattooed. I got tattooed because that was meaning that I belonged to that tribe. That when I died, I would cross the other side and be with that tribe of Indians, because they were all tattooed, and even on our arms. Well, that was so fulfilling for us. We were so happy. I could not be happier. But my little sister Mary Ann died 1 year, or the 4th year of being captive. She just couldn't take it anymore. She was too sorrowful, too weak. I was a little stronger than she was, and she didn't make it, and we buried her. And that was a very sad day. However, I had fallen in love with one of the chiefs, kind of like a stepbrother, and got married. And had 2 baby boys. And was life good. I had resigned myself to never want to go to the white people again, to always stay with the Mojaves, and it was a wonderful, wonderful time. However, there were some scouts that came to the tribe and said, "You have 2 white girls." Chief let him know one of them died, and we have 1 left, but you're not taking her. You can't have her. No way are we giving her up, and she won't come with you anyway. She loves us, we love her, and life is great. Well, they got really mad. A whole week of arguing, and I knew it was about me, and they weren't letting me hear about it. Finally, at the end of the week, the chief let me come in. He said, "You come on in here and listen to this. You tell me what you want to do." So what she heard was, if you do not give these Indian scouts and let you go with them back to Fort Yuba, if you don't go, we're going to come back and like, oh, we got to kill you all. So that was something to think about. Holy cow. I don't want any more family killed. I had so much love for my chief and my stepmother and my husband and my 2 children. I was going to sacrifice myself. And it was a hard day to go talk to my husband and tell him I was leaving. He was so mad. But I told him I didn't want him dead. So we went to Fort Yuba, but I didn't live in Indian, which is pretty much naked. Pretty much. And it was okay around the Indians, but when I came to Fort Yuba and I saw the soldiers come out, oh my gosh, I threw myself on the ground, and it was horrifying. I'm not going anywhere until you get me a dress. So some women came out, got me dressed, I got back in there. When I got inside the fort, I got some news I never thought I'd ever do. They told me that I had a brother still alive. And I went, what? How did that ever happen? That's a whole other story. But in 3 months, he came to that fort, and we got together and we hugged for a whole solid day, just crying and hugging and crying and hugging and talking. We could not believe that we actually had family alive. I thought I was the only one in the world all alone again. Well, from there, I was able to travel to San Diego, and my dad's two brothers heard about that I was alive, and I was back in the white people, with the white people again. So they came down and took me and my brother, and he said, we're going to take care of you. They didn't care about us before, but now they care about us. It's kind of strange. And so, when we finally got back to where they lived, which was way back, we started having to earn some money. And they were running a hotel, so it was wonderful again. But the preacher, we went to church every Sunday, and the preacher got really interested in our story of our life with the Indians, and he said, I want to write a book about you. And we said, okay. And we sat down with him, and we had a book made of our story. And the first book that was made was not accurate. And I would never tell all that ever happened to me and my sister. Never. In those days, certain things were never told, because if they were, I would have been stoned, and I would have been killed, and it would not have been my fault. People wouldn't care most times, right? So that book was done. It was produced in San Francisco, 3,000 copies. And more copies have to be made. And that book, those books are still being copied and made. And it's been a fantastic thing. I became a famous orator and was able to marry again. I was able to marry a really nice man, and I loved his family. I did speak professionally for 7 years about my story. Made quite a bit of money. But my husband I married took me to Texas, to Sherman, Texas, where we lived the rest of our life happily. And he was such a good guy, and he understood. I had problems with nightmares, as you can imagine, with all of the different things that happened to me, and migraine headaches, but we worked it out together, and I tried my best, and he tried his best, and we had a very happy marriage. I died at 63, and he died 2 years later, and overall, it was an awesome experience with all kinds of challenges.
On behalf of the California Living History Program, I want to thank you all for being here this evening. We do have refreshments. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have. This is a fundraiser for the museum, so if you learn something new tonight, throw a few dollars in the kitty over there. We appreciate that. Thank you all for coming.